Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm going to probably stand to the side of this lectern because, as you can see, I'm very small, so you probably won't even be able to see me. So, my name is Stefan Mordue. I'm going to be speaking fairly slow today. Thank you very much for my two translators in the booth. Give me a little wave if this is okay. Fantastic. So my name is Stefan Mordue. I'm from the United Kingdom, and I work for a consultancy, AECOM. And I work in a global digital life science consultancy. So I started out my career as a chartered architect, and that's really what I wanted to do as a little boy. And then as I progressed through my career, I studied project management, and my background is in small private architectural practice. I spent 6 years with the NBS, the National Building Specification, and while I was there, I worked on some great projects. I worked on a BIM toolkit, which we'll talk about for the UK government as part of their BIM mandate. But more recently, like I say, I'm now a consultant. So this term BIM, my interest in building information modelling really started in about 2012. And I was invited to join this group. This was the CIC BIM 2050 group. And we were a group of 17, I say youngish professionals, we're all under the age of 40. And we were a mix of architects and surveyors and engineers. And our task was simple. Our task was to look at the future of the construction industry. What will our industry look like in 2050? Now, hopefully, I'm 36 now, so hopefully I will be heading towards retirement in 2050. But there's one thing that's very clear. Our industry is going to be very different to the industry that we've got now. And what's interesting is my career now is really, I'm a data scientist. And that term wasn't really around 10, 20 years ago. So here's the conundrum. How do we prepare our current students for roles that haven't yet emerged, using technology that has yet to be invented, all to solve problems that we don't yet know are problems? During my career, I've been very fortunate to write some publications. That's my two beautiful daughters on the left. That's Rosa and Isabel. And this is Building Information Modelling for Dummies. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Christmas is just around the corner. Makes a lovely Christmas gift. I'm also interested in information for more than just monetary gains or efficiency, but how can we make a safer construction industry? So when you consider how vital construction is to not just the UK economy, but global economy, to the Polish economy, and then you consider how dangerous sometimes that industry is, we really need to look and address that. And I co-authored this publication, BIM for Construction, Health and Safety. Now, before I get onto my presentation, this is totally unrelated, but in February, I was walking down the stairs at home, and I had a box of books that I was going to take to the charity shop, and I slipped on my daughter's toy. I went down the stairs, I fractured my ankle in many, many places. So as you can see the stairs here, ladies and gentlemen, please, please be careful. And if you're wondering why I've got a pink leg cast on, well, while I was in hospital high on drugs, I foolishly said if I get 100 likes on Facebook, then I will get a pink plaster cast for charity, and that's what happened. So I live up in the northeast of England, where it's very cold, not as cold as Poland, but this is a Roman fort. It's about 100 miles away from Scotland. And as you can see, it's very traditional in the way that it's been constructed. We've been placing bricks on top of bricks. And now when we consider how we construct today, this could be a housing estate anywhere in the UK. Really not much has changed in terms of innovation. Now, of course, we've been modelling for a long, long time. If you've ever been to London, as you're flying over into London, you will see this building. This is St. Paul's Cathedral, designed by the architect Sir Christopher Wren. Now, this was, believe it or not, the tallest building from 1710 all the way to 1962. It was the tallest building in London. And this is a scale model of that building. It was a scale of 1 to 25, and it was designed so you could get down and you could look at eye level through the model, so you could get the design intent of the architect. It cost around about £600, which at the time was the price of a good family London home. But it has no direct connection with what was actually built. So although it gives us a good insight into the architect's design, post-construction it's pretty much useless. So we're moving to this era of modelling. So the outputs are often still the same, but they're just derived from a 3D model. Now, that's quite a simple statement, but I just want you to think about that for a moment, because that is a real cultural mind shift. It's a real change in how we think about things and how we model things. So it means we need to work together, we need to collaborate more. Now, I'm sure the UK industry is not alone, and we have lots of issues within our industry. We've also had lots of reports over the years, all saying the same thing, that our industry is inefficient, it's wasteful, we're not giving best value to the client. And we've had lots of these reports over the years, going right back to the 1930s, from the Latham report to the Egan report. And they're all saying the same thing: we've got a problem, we've got an issue, we've got an issue. But it wasn't until the 2011 government construction strategy that there was actually a solution presented. And that part of that solution was BIM. Now, the government builds a lot of assets. They build a lot of buildings, they build a lot of railways. Now, for them, it makes sense to use building information modelling because they're getting a better building at the end of the day. Now, the UK BIM's mandate hasn't happened just overnight. It came into effect last year in April 2016, but it's actually been 4 or 5 years in the making. So this was Sir Francis Mordue, the Minister for the Cabinet Office at the time, and 5 years ago he stood up and he said, we want to make the UK the vanguard of building information modelling. So therefore we put a plan into place. And this was one of the reasons for the government construction strategy. So using these techniques, it was anticipated we could save between 15 and 20% of construction costs. Now, when you consider how much the government builds as a client, that is, that's a significant saving. You may have saw this slide earlier as well. So this is the Construction Strategy 2025. And these are some pretty high targets, hard targets that we need to achieve by the year 2025. So in effect, we need to be building cheaper. We need to be building faster. We need to be kinder to the environment. We need to lower our emissions. And also, we need to improve on our export capabilities. So as consultants, we need to look at that. And the government realised that actually BIM, it won't solve all of this. It won't achieve all of these targets. However, it will go some way towards hopefully achieving these. Now, it's worth pointing out that BIM needs to be used in collaboration with a number of other initiatives. It needs to be used with new procurement methods. We need to look at how we benchmark our data, how we look at performance management. Fundamental to our BIM program was something called government soft landings. Now, historically, we tend to deliver a building, we hand the keys over, we run away, and we're working on to the next building. Soft landings is all about getting the client and the contractors and the end users involved in the process much earlier. It's about getting everybody around the table. So when we go to hand over this asset at the end of the day, we're giving them information in a form that somebody actually wants and how they're actually going to use it. Now, I'm sure you've maybe seen this diagram before. This is the lovingly referred to BIM wedge. It was nearly 10 years ago now that this diagram was drawn. And it was drawn as a way to communicate what the UK government meant by BIM. So today we've heard many different things. So what does BIM mean to you? It may mean something else to somebody different. So this was the UK government being very, very clear. Now, when you think about the term BIM, Building Information Modeling, it's actually quite misleading. Because when we're talking about building, we're not talking about the noun, we're talking about the verb to build. So that could be railways, it could be tunnels. And particularly in the case of the UK, a lot of our projects going forward will be these large infrastructure projects. So we have a number of levels. There's 4 levels depicted from 0 through to level 3. Now, level 0 is just lines on a page. They don't really mean anything. It's unstructured information. When we move to level 1, we may be working in a 3D environment, but we're not collaborating with others. We're not sharing that 3D information with other consultants. So as we move to level 2, this is what we're calling collaborative BIM. So this is where each design consultant or professional will construct their own model, and they're responsible for that model. So in contractual terms, not much has changed. Now, these models then come together, what's known as federation, in a common data environment. As we move to level 3, we're calling this integrated BIM. So this idea that we're all working on a central model somewhere in the cloud. I don't quite know what the cloud is or where it is, but up in the cloud somewhere, and we're all going to be working on a model in real time. Now, clearly, we've got a long way to go before we get there. We need to discuss open standards, interoperability, and that's before we even start to talk about legal frameworks and procurement. So when the government started to map this out, they realized that we have a number of standards in place, but actually, we're going to need to develop some standards along the way. And as part of the BIM mandate, we've got 3 main deliverables. They are still 2D PDFs from the 3D model, the native model, so we're not really talking about IFC at the moment, and we're also talking about this thing called COBE, Construction Operation Building Information Exchange data. So data all about facility management and operational stages. So we've kind of taken COBE as it was used in the United States, so its background is steeped in military, and we've used that and adapted that for our purposes. Now that's really important because when we start to talk about costs of buildings, actually it's the facilities management and operational stages is where we can get real value. We'll come on to that shortly. So as I said, we knew this wasn't going to happen overnight, so we had a 4 to 5 year plan. And part of that plan, we come up with what was called a push-pull strategy. So what do I mean by this? Well, as a government, they would push industry by being very clear about what information they wanted, when they wanted that information, and how they wanted that information. Because if you remember, our industry is really criticised for not giving best value to our clients. But how often are we actually getting the right information, the right brief from the clients? So that was their part of the bargain. So they would pull industry by giving us all the tools. So that was all the standards and all the protocols and all the frameworks to enable us to go out and work to level 2. Now, what the government did was they set the parameters, but they left the complexity up to the supply chain. So they didn't go into the nitty-gritty. They just set out the high-level objectives which they want industry to achieve, and they let industry come up with those solutions. So we've made all these documents available. They're freely available. So if you want to go to this website, they're all on bimlevel2.org. And it's really a one-stop shop. So it's got all the standards, the protocols, and the guidance. And these documents are scalable. So often when we talk about BIM projects, you see the big skyscrapers and these big multi-million-pound projects. But actually, it's equally applicable to smaller projects. And actually, that's quite important because smaller projects can often be more complex. As you know, they can often be more challenging. And that's where we really need coordinated information. So I'm going to talk you through some of the suite of standards that we have now. So we've got a comprehensive set of standards. The first one we have is this one. This is PAS 1192 Part 2. Now this document is all about the capital delivery stage of a project. It's about the design phase, and this is really setting out the framework on how you manage a BIM project. It talks about something called the common data environment. So the common data environment being a digital online place where we can manage, where we can share, and we can exchange information. Now that's really quite important because we're using what we're calling the single source of truth. We know we're using the most up-to-date information. And often we're very wasteful because we're working on the wrong data. Then we've also got this standard. This is Part 3. Now this standard talks all about the operational phases of a project. Now when you consider the costs of building, when you consider how much it costs to design a building, and then you consider how much it costs to run and maintain it, the design costs are nothing. So the real bulk of the costs are on the running and maintaining of that asset over its useful life, whether that's 20, 30, 50 years, whatever that may be. And this particular standard starts to talk about the different information models. We also have a standard around how we exchange information. So this is taking the COBie schema and how we take facilities management information. We've also got a security standard. Now, not just in construction, but we're always sharing information all the time, whether that's Twitter, whether that's Facebook. And because we've got it in a digital format, it's much easier to communicate and share. But that also exposes us to risks. It exposes us to risks. What happens if that information gets into the wrong hands? Now, I'm not just talking about terrorist attacks. I'm also talking about commercial advantage. For example, if you're a supermarket and you find out your local competitor is building down the road, that is a massive competitive advantage to understand and know that type of information. Now, there's a little anecdote to how this particular standard came about. In London, we've got a big train station, Victoria train station. Now, to demonstrate the capabilities of having a model in the cloud, we put a model of Victoria Station up in the cloud so people could see it and they could view it. The only problem with that was that the model had information about the security cameras, the location of where these security cameras are. Now, if you think you've got things like Google Earth and Street View, if you was going to plan an attack on that particular building, you can start to look at particular escape routes. So we need to be really, really careful about how we share information and particular access levels and who can get access to that. We have this document. This is a BIM protocol. Now, at level 2, nothing really changes in contractual terms, or very little changes in contractual terms. The architect is still responsible for the architectural information. The structural engineer is still responsible for the structural information. But what this does is, this is an 8-page document, and it's about signing up to the ethos of sharing and collaboration. So we will share our models at particular times. We will share our models when we're going to say we're going to share them. As we move to level 3, that's going to be completely different, and we're going to have to look at new contractual frameworks altogether. We also have a series of documents around briefing. Now, for me, this is one of the most important documents because this is about getting it right from the beginning. It's about getting the end users who's going to actually use these facilities and actually brief us properly. This is the information we want. This is how we want it. This is how we're going to use it. So it's really important that we understand how this data and information is going to be used. Because when we're talking about building information modeling on BIM, clients are not just procuring a physical building, they're also procuring a virtual building. And that virtual building has lots of advantages. We also have a new plan of work. So the plan of work describes the various stages that a construction project will go through. And I'll come on to that in a minute, but we've had to look at the way we deliver projects, because a BIM workflow means that we have to produce information at a much earlier stage. So we've had to look at how we address that. We've also had to look at how do we describe things. So we've looked at a new classification system. This is Uniclass 2015. Now this is what we're calling a unified classification system. So our previous classification systems would go into lots of details about buildings, but not so much details about road or rail or tunnel. So we needed a unified classification system which would span many different disciplines. We also have something called the digital toolkit, which I worked on. Now again, this is a free to use resource, and this really helps us to be able to describe what information we want, when we want it, and to what level of definition or detail or information. So it's about providing the right information at the right time. We don't want to produce too much information because it can be overwhelming, and actually it can be pointless in some points. So it's about delivering just the right information to answer a particular business question. So this is a really key diagram within our BIM suite of documents, and this is called the information delivery cycle. Now what this is doing, it's describing how information builds up and develops over time. So when you start of a project, you may have little to no information, but by the time you come over to the handover stage, you should be at 100% of information. Now, when we're talking about an information model, we're not just talking about the sexy graphics and the sexy 3D. An information model is actually a combination of three things. First of all, it's the graphical information. So it's the size and volume and spaces. It's also the non-graphical information. So performance information, facilities management information. And it's also associated documentation. So it could be a building manual. It could be instructions. But the important thing is they're all linked together to create this information model. Now, as you can see, these green, well, they're classed as green footballs. These are key decision points that the client has to make. So we're exchanging information all the way along the timeline. So the client can make informed decisions about whether to proceed to the next point. And he or she can do that because they've got the information to hand. Now, as I said, we've had to look at a new plan of work. Now, the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, is a popular plan of work in the UK. And that plan of work remained pretty much untouched for the last 50 years. The stages were ingrained on everybody's mind. But when we start to talk about building information modeling, we need to look at when we're delivering information. So there's two new stages. So the first stage, new stage, is the strategic definition stage, the strategy stage, the assessment stage. Do I need to build? Now, we've always had a strategy, but we've never really had it formally documented. For me, this is the important stage, the in-use. Now, the in-use stage is about learning from that asset once we've built it. It's about learning what went well, what didn't go well. So next time we go to build, extend or refurbishment, we're closing that feedback loop. And when you think about the automotive industry, car industry, they do that all the time. So they'll have a model of car in production for 3 or 4 years, and when they go to build the next model or version, they collect all that information from the owners of these cars and all the feedback from the garages and all the faults that they've had, and they improve upon it on the next time. In construction, we don't really do that. All that knowledge, all that expertise is just lost. So we want to be able to capture that and bring it all together. So this brings us on to the Digital Built Britain programme. So this is the next stage in the UK BIM programme. And it comprises of 3 key aspects. Firstly, it's about embedding level 2 BIM. It's about making level 2 what we're calling business as usual. Now for me, I think the success of BIM will be when we don't use the term BIM anymore, which seems a bit silly considering I've got a book entitled BIM for Dummies, because we'll just be using it. So, but it's been good at capturing a moment in time. So it's about making sure that government departments are up to speed, they've got the support, they've got the help. The second point is looking at the developments that we need to look at. So some of these complex issues around contract, around interoperability. So there's a piece of work that we need to look at that. And thirdly, it's about looking at areas beyond our current knowledge, beyond our current understanding. Is looking at other technologies, is looking at smart cities, the Internet of Things, sensors. And that comes a really, really interesting proposition. So the idea of the Digital Built Britain strategy, and as you see, there's not BIM in the title. It's about digital, it's about a digital transformation. Because BIM actually just plays a small part in this. It's about working with other initiatives. So the Internet of Things and sensors becomes a really interesting thing. Now, I'm sure many of you may have a smartwatch, and that smartwatch is tracking how many steps you're doing. It's monitoring your heartbeat. It's telling you if you're a bit overweight and you need to lay off all the Polish beer. So we're getting real-time feedback. Now imagine that for the construction industry. Imagine us getting real-time feedback. And that means we're going to move to an industry where we're paid for what we deliver. We're going to be paid on performance outcomes. The interesting thing for me is when we start to move to real-time data is predictive analytics. So how do we predict something that's going to happen before it's happened? Now let's just look at the Formula One industry, for example. Now they can predict when that car is going to break down before it's broken down. So they'll take all these data sets. They'll have a look at the engine. So the engine's making a lot of noise. Let's look at the heat data. That engine's producing excess heat, more heat than it should. So from all this information, they can start to predict when that car is going to fail. And with sensing technology, we'll be able to do that for our buildings. We'll be able to predict when fittings and fixtures are going to fail, when they're going to be needed to be replaced. Now, as I said before, if it cost £1 to design a building, roughly, it will cost you £10 to build it. It'll probably cost you about £100 to run and maintain it. So there's some of the relative costs. So you can see that a lot of our focus needs to be in the operational stages. Now, Digital Built Britain is about taking this one step further. It's about looking at the social performance. Now, social performance has a massive bearing on our economy. And these things are all interlinked. So, for example, if one of our hospitals fails, people can't get the operations that they need. People die. So you need to look at this as a whole ecosystem. So what are the social benefits if we can get a really high-performing hospital? That means people have access to good health care and people are healthy. It means they're not drawing on the state. It has a massive social benefit, social outcome. So this is just giving you an idea of where we are and where we're going. So we started back in 2010. That's when we had this idea that we want to embark on this BIM journey. We knew it wasn't going to happen overnight. We knew it would take time for industry to get used to collaborative ways of working. We knew it would take time for industry to adopt standards. We knew we had some of these standards, but we also knew that we had to develop them. We also knew that we had to invest money and time to produce some of these gaps in our program. So that's what we've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years. Now in 2016 we had our budget statement, and the government has committed a small proportion of budget towards the ongoing development towards what we're calling Digital Built Britain. So Digital Built Britain was published in 2015. And it is very much a high-level strategy. We know we have to work out the detail. But what we do know is that if we don't start to prepare today, the prize is so big, it would be silly, it would be foolish. We need to start to be thinking about these things now. And it may seem very, very early. You know, we're only just getting to grips or used to level 2. Why are we talking about level 3? We need to plan now. We need to have a plan in place. Now this diagram is just showing how it's part of a bigger ecosystem. So it's part of the smart city. It's part of the Internet of Things. So level 2 was very much about a building in its place. Level 3 is about a building in its wider context. And this becomes really interesting when we start to talk about open data formats. Now, I was in London in the week, and I was on the London Underground. And because Transport for London make a lot of their data freely available, I purchased an app for 79 pence, which meant I can see precisely what time the next tube is coming along. I know exactly where to stand on the platform, where the doors are going to open. And from this data, I can also know where the best place is to stand on the train so I can get a quick exit when I arrive at my destination. And this is because of open data. So when we start to think about this on a bigger scale, on a city scale, how does that data benefit us? So the governments, and your governments, will have lots of data about bin collection days, all this sort of stuff. And this is where it becomes really, really interesting. So how are we going to get there? We do the jump from level 2 to level 3 is a big jump. Not just for technology, but also culturally, for a mindset. We've always done it this way. Why are we going to do it another way? So we need to start to challenge some of our behaviors. So we recognize that this is going to be a series of small incremental steps. We're going to firstly have to look at technical issues. So we're going to have to look at interoperability. We're going to have to look at open standards. And I think the next speaker is going to be talking a little bit about that. Then it's also talking about the commercial aspect. And for me, the commercial aspect is going to be the big piece of this. We're going to need a new legal framework. Because when we're working on a central model, the boundaries aren't going to be so clear. So for me, these are the 4 things. We're going to need a skilled workforce. We're going to need people that can not only create these technologies, but we're going to need the people that know how to use them. We're also going to need regulations and frameworks. We're going to need to address privacy issues. So security, again, security is going to be a very, very big issue area, problem area. How do we protect our data? And how do we have regulations and frameworks that enables us to innovate, enables us to come up with the best solutions? Because at the moment, we tend to work in a blame culture. We blame each other. It wasn't my fault, it was a contractor. It wasn't my fault, it was the architect's fault. We need to move beyond that, but that means we need the legal framework to facilitate that. Also, we need to share technologies. So this goes back to my story about the London Underground. So we need to share technologies and data, not just within our own construction world, but also the wider world. So all that rich information, we need to share that to get real value from it. And lastly, we need to think about people. So today you'll hear a lot about technology. For me, BIM is a process which is enabled by technology and involves people. So don't get me wrong, technology is a vital part, but it's just an enabler. To me, this is all about a process. And a lot of the talks that I go to, a lot of the standards and literature that I listen to, we don't really talk about us. We don't really talk about a culture of change. And this is what it really is about. It's about a behavioural change more than anything else. Now, at 36, I've probably led half my life with the internet, and I've led half my life without the internet. I come out the other day without my smartphone and I felt naked. Has anybody had their pocket vibrate thinking you've got a message when you haven't? That's not healthy. So when we think about the next generation coming through, so when I think about my 2 children, which I showed you on that first slide, they're very familiar with technology. They're very familiar with swipes and clicks. They're very familiar with communicating via the internet, via Twitter. So hopefully some of these barriers will erode over time. But we really need to think about us and realize that people develop and accept things at different rates. Thank you very much for having me. Have a wonderful day. I will be around for the day, so please come and see me and we can have a chat, and I'd love to hear some of your ideas. Thank you.